Yeah, it goes.
So Craig, when you had this idea for Sonar and FreightWaves, what was like the first step that you took? Because I know you raised money. Could you tell us like about the process of like from the idea to actually making it a company, how it looked like?
So I remember I was working for I'm trying to remember what they did. Employee, I mean, it really wasn't a great career. So it was like employee engagement. And I just met my wife, and I told her I wanted to quit my job. And as a founder, and this has probably happened for you and other founders, is you just get this sort of like, I don't know, this feeling that you're onto something and you just can't stop it. And I think a lot of founders do. You sort of get these ideas and you have them for a couple of days, and then you sort of become disenchanted with it. There was something about this that I just kept going. And I remember I went home and I told my now wife, who we were just dating, only knew each other for a couple of months, that I wanted to quit my job and start this business. And she's like, I just met you. Like, I'm leaving New York City to move to, I lived in Texas at the time, moved to Texas. What are you talking about? Like, what are we going to do? I'm quitting my job in the city, and just became this thing. And I'm like, I'm doing it. And so she said, well, hold off. And so 2 days later, I was like, yeah, I quit my job. I turned in my notice. I'm doing it. Like, burn your bridge, burn your ships and burn the bridges and go. And I did. And I called up a couple of friends and said, hey, I need to raise money. And, raising money is no different than any other sales thing you do. Is it just, you literally are networking and asking for introductions. And there's no science to it. It's just, there's no like art to it, in the sense that it is literally a numbers game. And you pitch enough people like you would a product, and eventually, hopefully you'll find somebody that likes your idea, or at least likes you enough to help you shape the idea. And that's what happened. So we were fortunate to find a high net worth individual in Texas that within like 60 days of starting the business wrote us a check. It was a loan. It was a $2 million loan. They now have been paid back 100%, and they got 25% of the business, which $2 million to write a check for a PowerPoint presentation seems like a really good deal. And at the time it felt that way. Now it feels like a very expensive deal, because I know how much ownership they have the company, and they've gotten all their money back. So, but we just went out and networked it and raised money, and that set us on our way. And, the business took a while to sort of figure out what we wanted to do. We tried a number of things. We actually had a freight brokerage at one point.
Really?
That
FreightWaves was a freight brokerage?
It's called Now Freight.
Okay.
It was a small freight broker that we did in the earliest days. And we sold it off. We shut it down. It never really made money. It was, and so we showed that off. I mean, I think we were in it for like 4 months. In the early days of starting a business, you do a lot of things. You're like, oh, sure, we're going to do all these things. And you start chasing all these things. And eventually you're like, okay, I need to figure out what's actually going to work. And so to get media, sort of the earliest days of FreightWaves, to get media presence, we went out and talked to a lot of PR agents to sort of cover the story of FreightWaves, or at the time was our futures market and our data products. And we kept getting turned down. And I came across this one publicist that said they would take us on for $40,000 a month. And you're like, that's a lot of money. That's like $500,000 a year. Like, I'm not paying that. And I think he priced it that way. The guy priced it because he didn't want to say no. So it's sort of like in freight brokerage, a load that you don't want, you price really expensively and hope that the customer doesn't take it. But if they do take it, you're like, okay, I'm happy to deliver it. But we ended up finding this person, and we balked at it, and they said, look, you should do your own press. Topic's really difficult, and you should write your own content. And so we put out an ad, and Brian Strait, that worked at Flea Noter magazine, applied for the job, and he came on. And we said, look, we just want you to write about the market. We want you to write about the things going on in freight. And that was pretty much how we started.
When was this?
In 2017. It would have been March of 2017 when we wrote our first articles, and it was going well. And then Brian Strait went on vacation right during the hurricane that hit Houston. If you remember those hurricane,
I remember that.
I can't remember. I can't remember what the name was.
No, it's
say Ivy, but I don't know if it's It's not Ivy. Eileen or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, I remember it though.
Sorry if you live in
the
Houston.
Budweiser water loads afterwards that we made a lot of money on.
Yeah, right. So anyways, so he had gone on vacation, and I had ran FEMA's disaster logistics for US Express when I worked for the family business 20 years ago. And I just had experience understanding how hurricanes, because in these days, this was the very earliest days when the government started using private contractors to do disaster relief. Before that, it was all done by the military and FEMA. And at this point, they sort of outsourced all that. So we were the very first sort of participants in the market for hurricane relief. And I had been on the ground of these disaster programs where you have hundreds of trucks on the ground, and we ran logistics physically in the market. And so I wrote an op-ed on FreightWaves under Brian Straight's name about the hurricane, and it just blew up the site, and hundreds of thousands of views. And it was just massive. And I think I wrote 2 or 3 more articles in the same sort of response. I'd never considered myself a good writer. I mean, I'd always gotten like C's in English and never knew how to write. And as I started, and he came back from vacation, he was really angry that I used his name. Like, it was like a thing. Like, This isn't my articles. And then I started writing basically with no name. And I found that the stuff that I was writing was really resonating with the audience. And I realized, okay, there is a desire for news and information written from someone who has been sort of on the ground and sort of understands both the macro sort of picture of freight and how it works into the economy, but also sort of the micro. Like, okay, take this concept of what this war or what this hurricane or what COVID means and put it in a way that I, as a freight person, whether I'm a broker or a driver, can understand how that's going to impact my business. And I realized that didn't exist really. Like, if you look at the traditional publications in freight media, and they do a good job for what they're good at. Like, Transport Topics is a really good, if you're concerned about what's happening in Washington around public policy, they do a really good job covering it. And they'll always do a better job than we will, because they're a lobbyist organization and they talk to members of Congress. But when it comes to market information of like what is happening right now, that simply just didn't exist before we arrived. And because of it is particularly the freight brokers, not the drivers and not the carriers and not the shippers, the freight brokers really didn't have information about what was happening. They were largely left out of the topic. And over the last 20 years, freight brokerage has become a massively big industry. And yet no one was really speaking at it from the idea that this is a market and price is changing. There's a lot of things impacting it. And that was where we realized it was a huge opportunity. And that's how FreightWaves really, really got going. We realized, okay, we're on to something here.